This website is called Virtual Cables, and it is to help understand the connections to interfaces and mixing boards and other various apparatus. So, why? The website is going to give the student a very strong fundamental understanding of connections, what they are, what cables go with what ending connections, and the teachers will really enjoy this because it will bridge that gap between the simple and complex so that when they get out into the real world, they'll be studio ready. And a lot of students ask, well, what connections do I use? I'm not sure what SPDIF is and if it's RCA, if it's analog or digital, and this will help bridge that gap. So how do I get there? Well, we're going to talk about connection ends with the beginning of this website, the type of cables, a basic setup, mic instrument and line level explanation, and testing. So as the student learns line upon line, step upon step, he will eventually gain that complex understanding so when he graduates, he or she, they'll be ready. Here are the connections that we will focus on in the beginning part. I did not include MIDI because it is not audio, and that could be a supplement later on in the website. But for now, we'll focus on these different connections, DB25, RCA, TRS, and XLR as some of the major ones. So to start off, the student will get a small interactive example and explanation of the cables and what they do. And then, as the student explores and discovers using the mouse to drag and drop and see which cables will actually connect, the cables will light up when the answer is correct. Then they'll start to gain an understanding and an intuition of what that cable does and which ones will work where. So that will help them understand those concepts. So the bubble will pop up explaining, oh, this is a digital connection, this is an analog connection. And then once they gain that, they will go to an example of a basic setup interaction. So as we can see here, they will have different options to choose from, and they will drag the cable to the connection it's supposed to go to. For instance, the TS, tip sleeve cable, will go to the guitar. The TRS will go from the headphones to the headphone input, USB to the computer, XLR goes to the audio input of the speakers, and that will be the output, the TRS. And so as you can see, they make those connections of what goes where. Signal level explanations. We'll talk about mic level, line level, instrument level, and clocking and digital connections. This will help the student to understand the basic concepts of what the difference is between mic level, line level, and when to use a preamp, when to just go straight into the back of an interface, those types of things. And then for the test, as soon as they start to understand those basic concepts, they can go to level 1, which is a simple interface where they connect the outputs to the speakers and the headphones and the headphone jack. Very easy, as you can see there. Then they move on to, through the levels, to a more complex sort of setup. This is a C24 connecting to a 003, both DigiDesign products. And as you can see, there are DB25 connections and XLR and quarter-inch connections that go to the various inputs and outputs. Now those cable pictures will not be there, but they'll have to drop the cables and connections to the right places in order to pass the level. And then you'll move on to a live setup where you'll have a live mixer and you'll have to make those connections to the audio inputs where they respectively go. I got this off of the Mackie website where they have really great manuals that show you the different kinds of connections. This is a lot more complex live setup. As they move through the steps, they'll understand those kinds of concepts and they'll be able to create one on their own. And another setup of a live situation. Then moving on, you'll see the direct box cabling. That's another very common way of getting your audio from your guitar into a mixer or a live PA setup. This was compliments of the JDI, the radio website, using their direct box, one of the most popular direct boxes out there. After each student passes a level, the student can take a screenshot for the credit with the teacher and email it to the teacher in order to pass the supplement. Now, who is the audience? I've been talking a lot about students, and yes, the audience is basically the students. However, it is really meant for teachers as a supplement for their teaching. It's not meant to be an all-encompassing, I'll explain everything and you'll learn everything, you don't need a teacher. It is meant to be used in conjunction with a class. So, students in high school or college will be able to take a lot of advantage of understanding these basic concepts with this supplement. The teacher will get an access code for each student when he or she logs in to the website, and funding or payment for this project will come from advertising from different companies such as Presonus or Mackie, whichever company wants us to put their product onto the site to help students understand how they work. And as you can see here, the flow chart, you enter the main website and then there's a welcome and a purpose. The purpose of the website. Then, as you go, you can choose between a teacher login and password or a student login and password. And then you go to the introduction and the different levels, which all go back to the main website.
We'll never know how the world really is. We always have to construct what we think the world is. We do it in describing the human situation by telling stories. We do it in science. We do it in interesting kinds of ways of thinking of new images and so forth. So my passion has basically got to do with how human minds make this sort of reality.
That was Jerome Bruner, a very renowned psychologist who has given a lot of application to the educational field as far as learning step upon step. His concept was you can't just jump to the very complex, but you can teach someone very complex ideas once you teach them the simple concepts. And then you move up through revisiting the simple ones as you go up to the more complex. He had what was called discovery learning, and that was through the spiral curriculum, where a student does stage 1, the action stage, where the student explores and discovers and touches, in this case, clicking the mouse and discovering which cables work with where. And then stage 2, the iconic stage, where the student can imagine where those cables go because of repetitive use of the connections, actually doing a virtual studio, virtual live console. And then stage 3 will be symbolic, where the student generates his or her own ideas, making their own studio after they graduate or during their time in school. Moving on to the development, research will be needed and web design. The computer programmer will be working closely with the web designer. The research will basically contribute to the materials that will be produced in the website. Marketing will be used to talk with the different manufacturers to see if we can get payment for placement of product, and talking with the teachers to get them on board, all the audio teachers. And then, of course, beta testing to make sure that there are no bugs. So what are the hours? Well, research is about 30 hours, 28 hours for web design, and 58 hours, the brunt of it, will be by the computer programmer, because that will require a lot of processing and making sure that access codes are given. And then marketing, 20 hours and more will happen depending on the success of the marketing, and beta testing will be fairly easy. So total time will be 138 hours, and the total cost will be $2,500. Hopefully I can get some student who is just learning to use the applications of computer programming and web design, which will cut on costs. Hardware requirements, those will basically be any Intel computer that can run Dreamweaver, Photoshop, and a web server and a host. Well, that does it. So, are there any questions?